Somehow Palpatine returned.
Welcome back, everyone. It almost sounds like a joke, but Ian McDiarmid, who plays Emperor Palpatine in all the Star Wars movies and shows, just revealed that they were working on a new Palpatine series, and they have actually gone full meme. Somehow, Palpatine returned again. He explained the general plot, like where this would slot in the Star Wars timeline, George Lucas's ideas about Palpatine's backstory that they would have incorporated into the series with Darth Plagueis, and how it would have jumped around in his timeline, sort of like fitting in the larger Disney Plus era of Star Wars with all the different TV shows and movies. So we'll break it all down. I am always fascinated when you hear stuff like this. Oh, by the way, there were like these 10 different shows that we were working on, but we never announced. Stuff like this happens all the time at Marvel. The ground is littered with the bones of movies and TV series. Hearing about this Palpatine series is a little bit like hearing George Lucas's alternate scripts and stories for the sequel movies before he sold Star Wars to Disney, and they threw out all of those ideas and did their own sequel trilogy with totally different characters. But if it wasn't clear, this Palpatine series was something they were working on in the Disney Plus era of Star Wars more recently, not during the George Lucas pre-Disney era, so it was building on the other lore they've been introducing in all the movies and TV shows. But there was a point where George Lucas was going to get more into Palpatine's backstory in his private life. That was in the pre-Disney era. I'll explain what George Lucas's ideas on that were, and then obviously what the changes that Disney made during their era. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. You can kind of see a lot of Dave Filoni trying to adapt George Lucas's wider ideas for like the deeper lore on a lot of these characters. Really good example of that in present day is the Ahsoka series with them trying to do the Mortis gods. That's something that came from George Lucas during the Clone Wars era that Dave Filoni sort of picked up and ran with. But the reason why we're just learning about this Palpatine series now is because Ian McDiarmid, who plays the Emperor, was interviewed for the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, which just got re-released in theaters and is making gangbusters money too. Turns out people really like to go see Star Wars movies. But in the interview, he explained how he came to meet George Lucas back in the day and what it was like when he first became the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. So if you don't remember or you never seen the original versions of the movies before the special editions, Ian McDiarmid only became the Emperor during Return of the Jedi. Before that, in Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas used a different actor called Clive Reville. Once he did the special edition DVDs, he digitally replaced him with Ian McDiarmid so that there was more continuity across all the films. It's sort of the same thing that he eventually did with Hayden Christensen replacing the original Anakin Skywalker actor at the end of Return of the Jedi. The way that Ian McDiarmid tells it, George Lucas never really explained Palpatine's backstory when they were doing the original trilogy or even later when they did the prequels, so a lot of Palpatine's character work was him just trying to figure things out on his own in the way that actors like to know characters' backstories. This happened again to a certain degree when they brought him back for The Rise of Skywalker. He said that when they asked him to come back, he had to start working out how he could be connected to the Rey character. She was meant to be his granddaughter. There was a brief scene during the movie where they showed that he had a son who rebelled against him and then fled, leaving Rey on Jakku, and then eventually the Knights of Wren finding and killing him and his wife. So Ian McDiarmid said the thing that threw him for a loop was figuring out Palpatine's private life. Like, wait a minute, this means that he had to have a wife or concubines at some point. What was he doing in his private life outside of all the meetings that you saw him having, the big fights he was having in all the movies? There were just a lot of gaps in the character that they just left him to try and figure out on his own. Here's the thing though, George Lucas actually had started to work out Palpatine's backstory in greater detail, so they were going to push into that during the Star Wars Underworld series. That was the live-action series. They released the test footage of that, but it wound up being way too difficult for them to do it on the budget they wanted at that time, right after Revenge of the Sith in the late 2000s. He basically wanted to do what they're doing on The Mandalorian now on a Mandalorian-sized budget, so at the time the technology just was not there yet. During that series, the way they explained it is they were going to get into Palpatine's personal life way more and explain that at some point in his life he was basically this larger, more wealthy gangster-type character who had been betrayed by a woman, and a lot of it read like they were going to make Palpatine a much more sympathetic character. Obviously, that series never wound up getting made, but they wrote over 50 scripts, so you have to imagine that Palpatine's backstory, at least in the George Lucas era, was in those scripts.
Thank you. We could not have done this without you.
What wound up happening after they canceled the Star Wars Underworld series in the late 2000s is that he sold Star Wars to Disney in 2012. Around that time, another Legends book, the Darth Plagueis book, came out. That's the one that most people point to when they start talking about Palpatine's actual backstory, because the book does detail how Darth Plagueis found Palpatine, trained him, and then he joined the Senate, eventually become the Emperor, and so on and so forth. That's also the book that the Acolyte series was using to slowly adapt Darth Plagueis' story, and then eventually Emperor Palpatine's story. Like, eventually Palpatine would have shown up in the later seasons of that show had it continued. The way that Ian McDiarmid explains it, this new Palpatine show was meant to get into his whole history with Plagueis, basically picking up where the Acolyte would have left off with their story. So everybody reach for the meme again. Now, that Darth Plagueis book was technically Legends, but when the Acolytes started adapting the character, they implied that they were going to be doing more and more of the actual book, the way that Dave Filoni also recanonized Thrawn and a lot of things from Legends. If you did not watch The Acolyte, a lot of the ratings implied that most people did not watch The Acolyte. It was set about 100 years before Phantom Menace. Palpatine would not have been born till about 50 years later, so they implied that there were going to be a couple of time jumps during the series so that they could do Palpatine eventually. But the idea is that Palpatine is meant to be in his early 50s when the Phantom Menace begins, and he's serving as the senator from Naboo for a little while. Based on lore, Darth Plagueis was the one who orchestrated all that. First, he found Palpatine when he was younger. He was born on Naboo into a wealthy family. So this is where the legend stuff starts to diverge from official canon backstory and fill in a lot of the gaps. But when he was younger, Palpatine became fascinated with Sith artifacts and using his family wealth started collecting them. Darth Plagueis' real name was Hego Damask. He was a wealthy and powerful banker. He used his vast wealth to orchestrate all of his grand Sith plans. And even though Palpatine implied to Anakin Skywalker that his greatest success was discovering the secret to manipulating midichlorians to create life and immortality, it was only one of Plagueis' ultimate goals. Palpatine's whole long-term Sith plan to take over the galaxy to strike down the Jedi Order 66 was actually Darth Plagueis' long-term plan that he was using his vast wealth to orchestrate over a very, very long period of time. Palpatine eventually killed him and just took over the plan, co-opting it, making it his own plan.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
So the whole idea is that the Acolyte series was meant to start getting into this with what they were doing in Season 2 before the show was canceled, like the Darth Plagueis part of this early on when he was slowly learning about how the midichlorians actually worked. This is one of the many reasons why people were freaking out when the Acolyte Season 1 came out, because the show changed a lot of things, introduced a lot of new ideas to canon, but they were basically trying to pick up with this whole idea of Darth Plagueis learning how to influence life in the midichlorians. They implied the Force Witches on Brendok used the Force convergence at their planet to create Osha and her sister. Ultimately, Darth Plagueis learns about this and essentially manipulating his current apprentice, Chimere, turns Osha to the dark side, where he would eventually dissect all of the secrets of her creation, then use those to destroy the Jedi and become immortal himself. There were a lot of inconsistencies that they would have had to work out in those future seasons had the show continued, but they would have changed the lore for the Darth Plagueis book even more, so there would have been more changes on top of the ones they were already introducing. Long before the Acolyte series came out, though, during the Legends Plagueis book, the way they explained it is one of Palpatine's final tests given to him by Plagueis later, like closer to the events of Phantom Menace, when he first became his apprentice, was killing his whole family on Naboo. Palpatine then grows in power, and Darth Plagueis uses his wealth and influence to foster Palpatine's political career on the more legit-facing side of things, eventually getting him named as a senator from Naboo by the time he's middle-aged. Plagueis then eventually finishes learning the secrets to influencing the midichlorians. He himself becomes too afraid of this new power that he's found, messing with life itself, to obsess with it. Palpatine uses that as an opportunity to kill him when he becomes distracted, becoming the Sith Master himself, and taking over Plagueis' long-term plan to strike down the Jedi Order, which eventually culminated in Order 66. They started to pick up with this plot during the Mandalorian series. This is where we were talking about all the Grogu cloning subplot that they started to introduce in Season 1 and that culminated in Season 3. Essentially, the secret Plagueis learned, immortality, was Palpatine transferring his Force essence, his consciousness, to new bodies, which they also got into during the Dark Empire era, the books back in the day, the Dark Horse books. So if you're a 90s kid or you grew up before that at some point, you've probably seen versions of a lot of this where like they're recanonizing it slowly in what they're doing right now during the Mandalorian part of the timeline.
Interesting.
Dave Filoni actually specifically talked about them readapting the Thrawn trilogy from the 90s, the Timothy Zahn Thrawn trilogy. There was a whole lot of cloning subplot going on during that trilogy. During The Mandalorian now, they call this project Necromancer. The reason why it took them so long for it to work for Palpatine in Rise of Skywalker is they couldn't figure out how to clone Force-sensitive bodies in a way that would allow the bodies to persist, like the dark side Force energy would just burn through the bodies way too quickly. This was meant to tie with the whole Moff Gideon plot on The Mandalorian with Grogu. His big success was in finally using Grogu to figure out how to do this in a way that would allow the cloned bodies to continue to survive. He wanted to create an army of Force-sensitive clones, starting with clones of himself. They implied that he never told the rest of the Shadow Council that he successfully figured out how to do this, and that's why it took the Sith until the Rise of Skywalker to figure out how to actually do it with Palpatine. This also kind of implies that they never wound up subsequently getting their hands on Grogu and were never able to actually study him either. So if you're wondering, Grogu sounds like he's going to be safe from the Sith for many, many, many years. Personally, I am totally fine in them not doing this. Like, I feel like at a certain point, the whole Palpatine returned meme just became such a big thing, like so laughed at, that the people at Star Wars are like, yeah, we can't do this. We can't be doing a Palpatine series. Please don't bring him back again. But everyone, post all your reactions in the comments below. What do you think about them trying to do a Palpatine series? It makes sense that they would have like a billion different ideas that would never actually make it to screen. Like, oh yeah, of course they were trying to figure out how to do a Palpatine series. They were probably trying to figure out how to do a series just for the Gonk droid. There are a couple mystery live-action TV series that they're working on for after Ahsoka finishes, so we'll see what that winds up turning into. I just did a big video for the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer that they released. Click here for that, it's crazy, and click here for the Ahsoka Season 2 trailer they released. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.